Okay, I'd like to reconvene us, please. Okay, I'm going to read something at the bottom of the agenda here. It says, "The Architecture Review Committee of the City of Castle Hills reserve the right to go into executive closed session on any matter posted on this agenda if, in the opinion of the presiding officer or committee, such session is authorized under the Texas Opens Meetings Act, which we believe it is under Section 552071. And Mr. Henry has some things he would like to, a couple of legal things he would like to discuss with us, so I would like to adjourn this portion of the meeting and go into executive session for a few moments.
It will be very short.
Thank you. Time is 12 minutes after 10. Okay, I'd like to call us back into session, please. It is 10:24. We understand, before we get to our turn, there is one gentleman that the city manager tells us is in the audience, Mr. Pica from TxDOT, and I wonder if Mr. Pica would be kind enough to come up and offer his comments and maybe answer a question or two.
Well,
before you get
I'll
started,
say
sir, I'm
good
sorry, hold
morning
on.
here soon. My name is Dale Pica.
Hold on real quick, sir, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
Yes.
Over here. Did we count the time? Yes. All right, I'm just double checking. Thank you, sir.
Dale Pica, Texas Department of Transportation, 4615 Northwest Loop 410, 78229. And I guess maybe we could start with any questions you have, probably better.
Yes, sir. I think, Mr. Pica, perhaps the most intriguing question for us that might apply to you is I guess the condition of the mitigated condition at the corner of Winston and Northwest Military. As the engineers have told us, they expect that even in the mitigated condition, it will be an E. And those of us, I don't know, looking to the future, traffic is not going to get less. It's probably going to increase as time goes on. So is it likely to become an F? Is it something that you would recommend even as an E? I guess we're asking your opinion on that intersection.
Sure. And it's a loaded question. I have a lot of respect for Pape Dawson, Kimley Horn, Lee, Klotz. They have all worked for me in my career. They're very sound engineers. Traffic impact analyses sometimes are a guess at best because we use projections or other studies to base projections for a new site. And sometimes those studies are maybe in different parts of the country or maybe even different country. But again, it's a lot of times TIAs, traffic impact analyses, are a guess. And I was making some notes earlier. The level of service E, LOSE, is generally not an acceptable level of service for mitigating. Two, at TxDOT, we don't have a development standard that we require a mitigation to. We rely heavily on local governments to help us in the development process. That's why in unincorporated areas, we are often at the mercy of our pressure on a developer to make smart decisions in the development process. And in an incorporated area, we rely very heavily on local governments to help us in the development process. So I guess I'm trying to find the right answer here. Level service E is generally not an acceptable level as a standard across our industry. Generally, we try to get to C or better, and oftentimes we will allow a D, level of service D, as a compromise. So I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Well, it does help. Thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead, Barry, please.
We're talking about the traffic impact relative to the safety of the school. Do you have an opinion on the impact of the signalization on incoming traffic in the mornings and in the afternoon that are impacted by the signalization to accommodate the school unloading and coming into the site?
Sure, I do have some concern. The intersection at Winston is a signal that TxDOT owns and maintains because it's in your city limits. Just north is Lock Hill. The city limit line is just right at the intersection. The city of San Antonio maintains and owns that signal. We would have to do some coordination with them, with the city of San Antonio, that is, to better coordinate our signals through Castle Hills and going north of Lock Hill. We also maintain and own the West Avenue signal and the one at Lemonwood, Castlewood, there by 410. So those three signals are all TxDOT. We could do a better job now of coordinating traffic through those three intersections as you go north or south. But with this development, if it were to take place, we would really have to step up our game and address really, and it's a matter of just the signals talking to each other so that we can keep traffic moving. Now, you have to eventually interrupt Northwest Military traffic to allow side street movements to enter this traffic stream, and that's what Amy's simulation showed, was that, to me, it was the first time I've seen the model, the simulation she showed, but it looked like a heavy left turn volume coming out of Winston to go north. To me, that's surprising. I don't know what type of volume that is, what if it's a 50-50 distribution, half are going left, half are going right. But anytime you put a heavy left turn demand on a side street, that really does negatively impact our highway. So I'm going to be really keen on what these improvements on Winston are going to be like. I mean, to have that kind of left turn demand, you need really good left turn storage. And you also have to consider what's coming on the opposite side of Winston. I know it's not a whole lot of volume now, but we have to really consider both sides of Winston and how to best operate that signal. Again, I'm kind of rambling here, sorry.
No, it's very helpful, Mr. Pica, thank you. In the approval process, that if this were approved and went through and got permits and all of that and went up to y'all, is there any chance that TxDOT would say, no, this is a crummy idea, there's no way we can do this signalization, you people are on your own? Is there any chance that it could blow up like that?
There's no chance that TxDOT would get involved in the development at the local government level. We don't have any permitting authority the way it sits right now because the improvement is off-site. Access is not to our system. Let's take an example. If the school was taking access across the street at the corner of Winston and Northwest Military and they wanted direct access to our highway, then we would be involved. But since it involves access to the city's network, we don't have any permitting authority. Where that authority does come in is if the TIA recommends off-site improvements like it does, we would work with both City of Castle Hills and San Antonio to bring that mitigation to a successful project, and that's where we would get involved. And we've explained, we've met with the school and the city, with Kurt and his staff, to explain that process. It's going to be what's called a donation agreement. It's basically like a driveway permit that would be required to build those improvements in the state's right-of-way. And that would be signal improvements, access there at Winston and Northwest Military, and then also I believe there's some improvements planned or recommended at Lock Hill and Northwest Military. So all that would be part of a donation agreement with the school.
Please.
Is it safe to say that your priority is going to be your highway?
Yes, sir.
So therefore, when you look at mitigation and everything else, paramount to your decision is going to be that flow happen on Northwest Military, be consistent, and be able to handle what is there today and that is coming in the future.
Yes, sir.
The other question that I have is that therefore, can you give us, and I appreciate that, on the other issue is in terms of how you said earlier, that when you have projects that are considered a D, and somehow there's some mitigation, can you give us some examples of mitigation that get people from a D to a C, cost-wise, expectations? Can you give us that type of example?
Sure. In a case of Winston, we would be working with a developer to find basically another way to get in and out of the property, because you're basically developing a cul-de-sac where you're forcing everybody that goes in to come back out the same direction.
So the proposal that was earlier said that they are going to expand it to 33 feet. That's not sufficient to be able to mitigate that problem, is it?
Well, that's a reasonable expectation. 33 feet gives you enough for 3 lanes. They're narrow lanes, but ideally we'd like to see a little bit wider lanes, especially as you're turning in off of Northwest Military. Turning into an 11-foot lane is kind of hard if you're a big truck, so maybe they can address that. Maybe it's a little wider at the intersection. But 3 lanes across Winston is not unreasonable. That's a good option. It really goes to how far back can that left turn lane store traffic if there is indeed a high left turn demand coming back out. But you asked about, what's reasonable to mitigate.
Correct.
Schools, especially since they have high peak morning and afternoon demand, a lot of schools will try to direct traffic to come in one way and go out another, so they're not in conflict with each other, and don't put a lot of pressure at one particular intersection. And I don't know if that's an option here. I know going through and just meeting with the city and some of the residents going through Winston Lane the other direction, I think it's being discouraged, but I don't know, how do you prevent that, right? It's a public
Correct.
street.
So the fact that the plan presently has just one entrance, one exit, is part of the reason it gets the rating that it has?
Absolutely, yes, because you're entering and exiting at the same location.
Thank you, sir.
Is the 33-foot width, is that incorporating the deceleration lane to go into the parking lot, or is that additional to that?
I believe that's additional.
So it's 3 lanes plus the the deeper deceleration lane to get into the, is that something they can answer?
I believe the applicant would have to answer that.
Okay. The other question is there any physical barrier to prevent vehicles from going through the residential neighborhood? In other words, how is that? It's
Yeah,
not-
well, I think I heard the applicant mention how they designed their second driveway that would encourage basically just right turns into the property and would try to restrict right turns out. There's ways you can design your driveway to limit
Right.
how drivers enter and exit your driveway. And I think I heard somebody say pork chop, and that's a common term we use. You build like a little pork chop island
Right.
to restrict movements. So.
Thank you.
I have a timeline question. With the donation agreement that you mentioned, Mr. Deacon, how long would that take, and how long would it take between the time the agreement is reached and actually to have the signals changed to the proper timing? How much time is involved there?
It can move pretty quick if the developer is also hustling with us. Donation agreements require an act of our commission in Austin. So if you backtrack and say you wanted to target the month of June commission, we have one commission meeting a month, then generally all of our paperwork has to be done by mid-May, so about 6 weeks prior to the meeting. So you would start that process, probably 3 months in advance of that. So, January, February to meet a June commission meeting. So about 6 months is about reasonable. We've done it in a faster time, 4 months. But again, it's a matter of just getting things scheduled, just like the city has to schedule things before council. We have to get things scheduled before our commission.
Okay, thank you.
I have one more question. I hate to belabor this, but when they do the improvements on Winston, are they going to terminate those improvements right at their entrance driveway, or are they going to pave and complete the improvements all the way to Castle Lane? Can someone answer that?
I don't know.
That'll be a question for the applicant.
Okay.
Just one last question for yourself. In terms of looking at this project, in your opinion, what should the right size street be for a facility like this?
What the applicant is proposing is a reasonable solution to carry traffic in both directions. They are proposing, it sounds like, a right turn lane into their property. And they're accommodating traffic coming out by having a left turn lane. I think it's a dedicated left turn lane. It's what I would recommend. You could take that further by widening Winston even more by creating a dedicated left, through, and right turn lane. So you have 3 lanes going out and 1 lane coming in. That opens up some capacity at the intersection. It separates the movements. Anytime you have combined movements in a lane, it's going to take away capacity. But if you build a wider street, so you have 33 feet, now you add another 11, it's 44 feet. So 11
So you're
foot,
talking 4 lanes.
4 lanes gives you 3 outbound lanes and 1 inbound lane.
So
And-
therefore, the transverse question is presently, it's not adequate at all.
Well, again, they demonstrated.
21 feet versus your 44. So all I have to do is reverse it and say, therefore, 21 is unacceptable.
Well, they're proposing 33, but 21 is certainly inadequate to handle capacity.
At presently. Thank
Yes.
you.
Any other questions for Mr. Pica? All right, thanks so much for your time,
You're
sir.
welcome, thank you.
Okay, members, questions? Anna? Barry, yes, please?
Please, if the engineer or the architect for the school can answer my question about the improvements, where do the improvements stop as far as coming south on Winston?
The client's prepared to take it all the way to Castle.
Okay, curb and paved areas
Curb, sidewalk, and 2 lanes.
and 2 lanes?
Well, if you want the 3rd lane going in, we were using that 3rd lane as a way to restrict traffic from getting back there. We don't want to
So-
improve it too much to make it too tempting, right?
What would be the minimum width on a routine two-way thoroughfare?
Typically in a residential, we would use 28 feet minimum for a 2-lane road.
Thank you.
No more questions, Barry? Okay, thank you. Anna, do you have any questions?
Just on that crosswalk that you all said that you were doing from the school to Northwest Military and that sidewalk, it's on an incline. So what about people that are on wheelchairs?
We would make it accessible, compliant. It would comply with the ADA. We would slope the property in a way so that it would comply with that.
Was that in regard to the on-site intersection or the off-site one at Military and Winston?
Going towards Northwest Military for the bus stop.
I think she's talking in reference to the sidewalk.
Okay, and at the actual intersection itself, anytime you dip into a corner and begin to make changes, you're required to bring the receiving ramp also into ADA compliance. And so there will be improvements on the bus stop side of Military to accommodate that traffic, so.
Thank you.
There is some incline, but you smooth it out enough so that you're able to meet that 1 in 12 slope requirement. 1 in
Thank you.
20 is preferable.
Okay, thank you.
No other questions?
Oh, yeah, there's other questions.
Okay. I'll stand up here until,
Okay,
if I need help, I'll call for it.
I think I'll ask a couple questions, and probably this is going to apply to the traffic study, so I'll ask Amy to once again stand back up. In trying to understand this study and the studies of it, it appears that, and now the numbers have changed just as of this evening, but in looking at the trip generation, you guys start out with the 1127 size of the school, the initial size of the school, and take 80% of that and begin your analysis with that. So the 80%, I presume, is based on information that BASIS gave you all to kind of have a sense of what that represents.
Well, and I think there's an important clarification to make. So that initial traffic study that had the 80% reduction was the traffic study that was developed to be consistent with City of San Antonio TIA requirements. And as more questions evolved, that study, I guess, remains intact, but kind of in parallel, we've looked at what that peak 15 to 20 minutes would look like and modeled that. And that's where the volume adjustments, the peak hour factor adjustments, and all of those things combined to create, I would call maybe a supplementary analysis. So they're almost separated at this point, if that helps at all. The 80% one really was for
Let me
the,
tell you where my heartburn is with this,
absolutely.
and maybe the new information addresses it in a different way. But when you start with the 902 students, in order to figure out how many trips you have between your 7 a.m. and 8 a.m. peak hour, you multiply that 902 by 40.49. let's call it 50% just to make the math easy. So the question is, based on this model, how does the other half get to school in the morning?
And that's where that second peak hour, so there's the first arrival and there's another arrival that is of smaller size. And so the bulk will arrive in one of the two peaks. I forget, I'm sorry, which order they happen in, but there are two different drop-off periods.
Right, what are the percentages? Is it about 35 and 65?
I think 40, 60-40, so 40% in the earlier and 60% for that 8:35 bell.
8:30, so that pushes it past the 7 to 8 peak window.
Yeah. Because the thing that worries me is the impact to the neighbors between the school and Northwest Military, mostly. I mean, due respect to the folks on Foxhall and all those other areas, but these guys are at ground zero here. And what I was trying to do is come up with a metric to figure out how frequently a car passes by those houses. Based on the information you had previously provided, the entering trips would be about one car every 8 seconds,
And
based on an hour.
Yes, and I do think one thing to take into consideration in doing that is if you did spread it evenly across the hour, that would be the case. But the traffic signal at Winston will create a metering effect, and so folks won't be able to, there will be gaps in the traffic when that Winston signal is metering them.
Well, your model showed us the left turn lane
Yes.
never got
cues.
free.
Correct, and there
And
is,
then depending on what the signal was doing, there was either a lot of traffic coming in west on Winston or not so much. So I'm thinking about this gentleman that's lived there for 50 years, and I don't think he could navigate that. And I don't think we should do that to him.
during the peak, during that peak 15 to 20 minutes in the morning, it is projected that the left turn queue will be significant at that location. That is just the nature of the school traffic.
It's the nature of 1,100 students.
It would be in 3 dismissals, so,
Well,
or
see, and then,
2 arrivals.
but there's a lot of factors coming in here.
Absolutely.
And perhaps one of the most important one is the one that, as one of the gentlemen pointed out earlier, you don't have 2 streets to dump onto. And in your early, you talked about acquiescing to neighbors' wishes, which is great, but one of the early concessions was that, and the neighbors refused to let the folks go into the neighborhood, further west on Winston and down into Castle. So where most standards suggest you have 2 streets, you have traffic going both ways on 1 street. And so all that traffic coming in and coming out is going to pass in front of these 4 houses. And whether, whether it's 1,000, every engineer has a different number
Right.
for what it is, but whether it's 1,000 or 500 or 200, in 15 minutes, 20 minutes, or an hour and a half, it's going to be really hard for those folks to get out of those driveways. And that's what worries me. So anyway,
One of the things that was mentioned earlier was the future reduction of students. You start off 1127, and then you come down to 900, and that how do you base that when obviously your growth pattern seems to be increasing, and yet you're projecting, I suppose, in year 3, 4, or 5, that it's going to be reduced? Can you answer that again? I didn't get quite the clarification how you reached that.
Sure, I'm happy to answer that. So the reason that our enrollment is projected to shrink is that we are essentially reducing or shrinking the pipeline of students that are coming into the school.
So it'll be harder for people to get into your school?
No.
So how do you do that?
So here's how it's going to work. So Basis Castle Hills is planned to be a 6 through 12 school. So students would be matriculating from either of the two existing basis campuses, which will be converted to schools for grades K through 5. So you have, at each campus, in the 5th grade, we're going to have 120 students from each campus, again, combining into the 6th grade at Basis Castle Hills. So that gets you to 240 if every single kid comes to Basis Castle Hills. In previous years, as we were starting up our two existing schools, when we had excess room in our buildings, we would bring in sometimes 150 or 180 5th or 6th graders. And that's why right now we have a very large 7th and 8th grade class because of bringing in the 150 to 180 5th and 6th graders in prior years. We're not going to have the building capacity to bring in 150 to 180 kids in the future at either campus. So when you've got only 120 at each campus combined to the 6th grade, then as that bubble that we have in middle school graduates, then the school shrinks down to the 900.
From what we were presenting, I never did read, I mean, I reviewed it all, but I didn't count chairs. What is your building capacity?
What is it, 1,200?
There's 40 classrooms, and you never use a school at full capacity. It's never 100%.
what
You
is the
shoot for
capacity?
1,100 is the
So
answer.
you have
I think they're going to
1,100
be tight
spaces
that
of it.
first year. I think you could squeeze
You're telling me you have
11,
a capacity
27,
for
1150.
1,100 and you're only going to use 900?
We plan on converting 2 of those to locker rooms, and there's other uses. There's an active drama program there that wants to use one for sets.
So the building that
There's
you're
other
proposing
uses.
is 1,100 capacity?
It's 11 is comfortable. They're going to squeeze 1127 in there year one.
Okay. And one other question I heard earlier that we're gonna, I think Jack had asked about the bike racks. How will anybody bike through that small street with the traffic?
There's a sidewalk that goes out to military. It was a request of the art committee. There are sidewalks all the way from military to our site. So I don't know where they're coming from beyond that. They're proposed. I'm sorry, that's what we're proposing to build for the city, for every resident
Correct.
that wants to walk along that sidewalk. We'd take it from our site all the way there,
Thank you.
the military.
And I just wanted to add the clarification. The traffic analysis was never reduced beyond the 1127. So there was not an alternate scenario that was performed with 900.
Can I ask just one other question?
Ask
Can
as
you
many
tell us a
questions
little
as
bit
you
about the
want.
lighting? I know you had proposed, you have lighting that is, and so when you have the perimeter, I saw they were at zeros, and then you had other ones. Where's my lighting guy? Is he here? Oh, that's you,
I
right?
spoke to that, yes. My
All right,
electrical
so
engineer
it was
prepared
page
that.
11 or something like that, and so tell us about the lighting, because the impact of having, first of all, we heard in our pre-meeting earlier that you're not going to have anything out beyond dusk, right?
There will, on occasions, be student performances or graduations or those rare occasions that we discussed.
Okay,
There would be some night activities on occasion.
but no outdoor sports, no lights,
No.
no stadium lights?
No stadium
Anything like
lights.
that, right?
No.
And so with the capacity of the lighting that you have here, remind me how you have done a great job to reduce the impact with the lighting that you have proposed here. You
So
said you utilize different,
one requirement that many municipalities adopt is what's called a dark sky requirement. No light is to be shown up into the sky or beyond the property lines. Lighting technologies come a long way with LEDs to be able to really focus that light down where you want it so that it's not shining in a neighbor's back window or spilling out onto the street. You don't have the bright spots that you used to. They're very focused down. So as you drive by this, it wouldn't be a lot of light pollution, it's often called. It would really just be ground level illumination for safety.
okay.
So that's
thank
pretty
you.
typical standard, and this is definitely industry best practice at trying to keep light levels to a reasonable and safe level without bothering the neighbors.
Thank you.
Sure.
I just want to quickly address the comment about access from one street. While we agree that it's definitely optimal to have more than one access point whenever possible, we do have some existing schools with large enrollments where we've successfully managed the traffic flow in and out of one street. So I just want to mention that's something that we do have experience with, and unfortunately in this area there was not a site that we were able to find that had that access.
That was the text, Scott.
Across the street's only 4 acres. You said that it's too small, right?
All right, we just stay focused with us.
Okay. All righty. Any other questions, group? Juan?
Yeah, Jack, and one of the things that I wanted to tell you is that, and first of all, I appreciate everybody being here. We've learned so much. You can sit down. You know, it was quite an endeavor from reading everything and learning so much more than what we were originally tasked to do at the Architectural Committee. You know, we see many projects come forward, but this one was interesting. And you know, I will tell you this, when I looked up the definition of lane, it's a narrow country road, and this definitely meets that criteria. But what was overarching for me was when you start looking at this project was, you know, I thought we had to do several things to understand it better, and that was to interject some practicality, some reality, and common sense. So when you start looking at this, every morning when I prepare for work, Jack, I listen to the news and I hear the traffic issues of the day. And with TxDOT in Pleasant, I apologize, sir, for what I'm about to say, but I hear the repeated issues over there at Highway 90 and Nogalitos, right? Every single day there's an accident there. Then you hear about that hairpin curve right there at I-10 coming from 35 to 10, another truck overturned. That probably was some engineer thought that was workable back in the day, but not applicable to now. And then I think of our beloved 410. Love 410, and I'm sure those same traffic engineers provided the study that showed that the traffic flow from Jackson Keller Elementary world would easily go down back to West Avenue, come up and queue on to 410. Well, that's not reality, as my neighborhood understands, because cars cut through, and they go through our neighborhood and they hit Gladiola, and they queue up and they take off, and before you know it, they're coming through our neighborhood. So reality cuts through every single time. And Mr. Chairman, what I've understood is traffic follows the path of least resistance. And the path of least resistance in this case is our neighborhoods. That's what's reality there. And then I also think of Lee High School. I'm not done yet, I'm gonna roll now. I waited this long, and so, you know, you think of Lee High School and everything that happened there. Expansion and growth happened there too. So what was the result, right? And sounds familiar, kids in cars looked elsewhere to park. They looked everywhere else, they came into it, and I'm sure, you know, traffic engineers, God loves them too, I'm sure, said, you know, showed impact studies and more parking studies and queuing lines, you know, drawn up by the computers and fancy calculations, as we heard tonight. And then they gave it their stamp of approval. But reality comes in and practicality comes out to play again. And kids parked where they wanted to park. We had to move them out. There were signs that were put up by our people. Once again, to me, what I want to be able to prevent is us having unfunded mandates, meaning that a problem that exists today has to be addressed by our city in the future because we did not plan properly in the first place. Those things hurt our community. And for me, it's our job to be able to understand how we learn from our past, how we progress. That's progression, right? You get better at what you do. Yes, there's situations that we heard about today. We heard about St. George. We've heard about Antonian. We've heard about other areas. And it's time we get smarter. It's time we make a decision that makes sense. And for me, you know, there was something that was mentioned which I thought was really interesting, and the answer was, you know, some things are going to remain unanswered until we build the building. Well, I prefer not to wait for that. I prefer not to wait for that because, you know, problems will come forward. And I think the shift will go away from the applicant, will come back to us as taxpayers. And so therefore, Mr. Chairman, using my practicality, my understanding of reality and common sense, I make the motion to deny the application presented before us today.
Do I hear a second? Second. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Okay, we're not done. We're not done. Item 4, consider and act upon an application from Castle Hills First Baptist Church Spacious Schools regarding the proposed removal of trees to develop a 62,000 square foot, 2-story private charter school. This proposed tree removal is located at the following properties: 121 South Winston, 123 South Winston, 119 South Winston, 117 South Winston, 115 South Winston, 113 South Winston. I don't know if it's necessary. You folks are certainly welcome to, if you wish, to provide more information, but Jake, you presented the tree plan. Is there anything further that you would like to present with respect to that? No. Okay. Okay, in that case, let us open a public hearing. It's 11 o'clock, and I believe there were a couple of folks who wanted to speak to item 4. Ms. Ackley, Jackie Ackley, and Wayne Carter. And, okay, that's 2. There's 1 more.
I'll be brief, but I just lost 2 heritage oaks in my backyard. The arborist said they're 120 years old before the tornado that came through town a couple weeks back made them fall over. I've planted oak trees, but over 5 years, they're only 5 foot tall, so I got about 115 years left to go on those oak trees to get them up to par. Of course, trees cool our atmosphere. They give us oxygen back from our own carbon dioxide. They cool by 2 mechanisms, shade and giving off water when they respire, so that water evaporates, taking the heat of evaporation with them. My comment is only that I'm sure a tree plan has been submitted that's wonderful, but if it involves removing any trees, could we just approve it with the caveat that the removal would pend the following 2 things. Number 1, please don't allow the trees to be removed until BASIS actually owns the property. And number 2, they get their building permit for the school. Because if the trees are taken down and human actions change later, you can't put them back quickly. So please don't allow their removal until the owners own the property and their building plans approved. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Carter?
Chairman, my name is Wayne Carter. I reside at 125 South Winston Lane and have been since 1946. And I think I've completely forgotten everything I wanted to say about trees. I want to thank you folks for the practicality, the sanity check. I was talked into about 20 years ago to serve on this board. My wife and one of the city council members talked me into it because they wanted an engineer on there for a sanity check. You didn't need an engineer up there tonight. Y'all did the sanity check. But let me just, if for whatever God-forsaken reason this goes to city council and it does get approved, let me just make everyone aware. There are fence lines in Texas and there are boundary lines in Texas. And there are 2 sides to every fence. The Castle Hills First Baptist Church has been sued by me, and they had to pay because they took trees down within my property line, not the fence line. They were warned. When they went in there and they bulldozed down those 6 houses, they were warned by my wife, don't bulldoze down those trees. They did it anyway. I went out there and spoke to the surveyor when he was doing a survey. Seemed like he'd been there for quite some time. I kept seeing him over on 2 of the corners. I went up to him and asked him, are you having trouble closing on this survey? He said, yeah. I said, the fence lines are not the property lines. You need to get your metal detector out and find the iron pins. So there are trees, granted, some of those trees are nuisance, careless, hackberry trees along my fence line, but they are within the property line. Some of those are pecan trees. So the property line is not the fence line along our adjoining fence. And BASIS needs to, and I'm sure the surveyor has warned them on that. If that school gets built, we're going to be talking about trees along the Carter fence line. And again, I want to thank you for not throwing the Mendozas under the bus tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. There's one more. Ms. McGinty? I think that's it.
This is just real short and sweet, along the line of practicality. If they cannot count the number of lanes of Northwest Military in Castle Hills, do not trust them to count the number of trees. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, members?
Just a clarification, Mr. Henry. In light of the decision that was made earlier, should we postpone this item, or are you asking us to enact on it?
No, you're doing
two separate-
recommendations, so they're going to the council, so the council could do one or the other. You're supposed to kind of.
Recommend to move it forward.
Yeah, and so you do a recommendation one way or the other.
Can I ask a question? I know this has been a bitter pill for the BASIS school, but I'd like a clarification, even though you really weren't wanting to speak on it. I thought you had said that you're going to preserve the existing trees and add additional trees. Did I misinterpret that?
All around the property line, sir, we intended to keep every last one we could. It being a fairly steeply sloped site and wanting to put a school there, we would have to remove some.
Thank you.
How many you're taking out, Jake?
It was on that plan. I don't recall offhand. I'm sorry. You have that in your documents, the landscape plan. Sorry, I don't know that number off the top of my head at the moment.
I don't know if the tree issue was a problem. I think they exceeded what we expected to be.
I would stipulate the point to the good people of Castle Hills that the document says 61.
61, okay. Thank you.
We've replaced everything we're required to, and you should check your own statute on that, I suppose, if there's thought that has to be replaced one for one. That is not the way it reads currently.
Mm-hmm.
It's only certain sizes, which we didn't
Yeah, I
meet.
think you're only taking down one that's I forget the term. It's not a heritage tree, but it's the next step down.
Protected.
Protected, thank you, Kim.
24
I think you're only
copper,
taking
yeah.
one protected, so there's not a lot of mitigation that is required. But your landscape plan is beautiful. I mean, you're proposing to plant lots of trees and shrubs, and if it looks like what your rendering shows it to be like, it's going to be beautiful. Any other questions, members?
Don't forget to close the public hearing.
Thank you. Let's close the public hearing. It is 11:07. And do I hear a motion?
I move the motion we close. We quit. We're done.
Okay, we have to move on this issue, the trees.
I would make a motion that we accept the tree preservation as presented.
Okay.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Aye. Passes unanimously. Thank you all so much. Okay, now we need a motion to adjourn. I think we're done. Betty?
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned. Thank you all.